Lieutenant Yasunori Aoki eased his A6M0 toward Okinawa just after dawn on April 6, 1945. Training and doctrine told him what he should see below. A dense American invasion armada, slow transports and cargo ships clustered together, a target field made for the divine wind. Instead, the sea looked strangely empty. No thick wall of hulls, no obvious center to strike. What Aoki had flown into was something new. A defensive web stretched far out from the beaches, a ring of American destroyers posted alone on the horizon. They weren't a porous perimeter or a routine screen. They were radar pickets, tripwires bristling with electronics and guns, set precisely to break the momentum and surprise that kamikaze tactics relied upon. Japan's special attack units had been formed when conventional air power could no longer halt the American advance. Veteran pilots were gone, airframes were outclassed, and the industrial balance was overwhelming. The kamikaze promised a brutal arithmetic. Sacrifice an airplane and a pilot to guarantee a hit on a ship. Aoki accepted the logic and the cost. His Zero carried a 250-kilogram bomb and enough fuel for a one-way run. He didn't need bomber school finesse. He needed only to find a target, dive, and hold course through the storm. Everything his training predicted depended on getting close before the enemy truly saw him. What he faced instead was a defense built to see first and fight early. 16 radar picket stations ringed Okinawa at distances from roughly 20 to nearly 100 miles from the main force. At each station, destroyers carried powerful air search radar and radios tied into a fighter direction network. They did not merely watch. They vectored American combat air patrols to intercept raids long before the attackers could spread out and pick their angles. The concept turned sudden ambushes into extended, controlled battles. By the time Aoki's formation crossed into the ring, American fighters were already climbing to meet them, summoned not by eyes on a bridge, but by spinning antennas and controllers speaking comm vectors into headsets. That early interception mattered. Instead of racing fresh and organized toward a dense fleet, the attackers were forced to maneuver, burn fuel, and fight for survival while still far from any ship's silhouette. The psychological script flipped too. Aoki had expected to dive into gunfire only in the final seconds. Now he was dogfighting well short of the target, burning minutes he couldn't afford. Pilots who survived those first engagements arrived scattered, stressed, and damaged. Hardly the conditions for precise, coordinated suicide dives. And when a lone American destroyer finally did loom ahead, seemingly isolated, seemingly vulnerable, it turned out to be anything but an easy kill. The destroyer's main batteries carried a new secret: proximity fuses, sometimes called VT fuses. Instead of relying on timed bursts or perfect ranging, each 5-inch shell housed a tiny radio set that sensed when it was near an aircraft and detonated at lethal distance. That meant the first salvos could be effective and rapidly. Where older anti-aircraft techniques required walking fire onto a moving target, proximity fuses put deadliness right at the shell. The difference was shocking to pilots. Aoki felt that shock immediately as the first airbursts shredded control surfaces and punched fragments through his Zero's thin skin. His expectation, that he could endure a few ranging shots and press home, was suddenly violently wrong. And the 5-inch guns were only the long arm of the picket's defense. Layers of 40mm Bofors and 20mm Oerlikons built a dense curtain closer in, while directors and radar fused all those weapons into a continuous response from horizon to hull. This wasn't a single line of guns. It was a choreographed system. As Aoki and his comrades dove, the destroyer's combat information center, its nerve center, was also guiding friendly Hellcats toward the next wave, assigning sectors, and making sure no attacker slipped through unopposed. The result was not just more fire. It was better fire, always where it needed to be, always earlier than the attackers expected. Other picket stations fought the same fight. USS Bush and her consorts absorbed wave after wave as the first of the mass Kikusui attacks rolled in. Hundreds of kamikaze aircraft launched in coordinated groups designed to saturate any single ship's defenses. Commander Roland Smoot on Bush used his SK radar to pick up raids at long range, then opened with proximity-fused salvos that bracketed targets immediately. The theory behind kamikaze tactics, surprise, compression of time and distance, was stripped away. Pilots who had expected a brief, decisive rush found themselves under accurate, lethal fire for long minutes, with fighter opposition cutting down those who tried to regroup or time a clean run. The destroyers paid a brutal price for their position. Isolated by design, they drew the sting so that the troopships and carriers farther back could ready their own defense. Many picket ships were hit. Some were lost. Yet even in the worst moments, the system worked as intended. Early warning allowed fighters to be massed, guns to be manned, damage control teams to brace, and high-value ships to avoid surprise. The most famous single battle belonged to USS Laffey, which survived a storm of desperate dives and bombs through a harrowing hour and more. Its gunners, directors, and damage control showing what an integrated defense could endure when every layer of the system did its part. Coordination was the quiet superpower. Controllers aboard pickets acted as floating fighter direction centers, calling vectors and altitudes, handing targets from ship to air, ensuring that no sector was ignored and no two defenders wasted effort on the same attacker. On another hellish day, USS Evans and USS Hadley fought side by side, their gunnery teams and fighter cover blending into a single, lethal web that tore apart wave after wave. These were not invulnerable shields. Both ships suffered terribly. But they demonstrated that when radar, radios, and proximity-fused guns were fused into one organism, even the fiercest mass attack could be blunted. From the Japanese perspective, the shock cut deep. Doctrine had promised that isolated American ships would be easiest to kill, that surprise would always tilt the odds. Instead, isolated pickets were the most technologically prepared and the most closely tied to fighter cover. Reports filtering back from surviving pilots and staff officers described guns that seemed to explode on command, fighters appearing out of empty sky at impossible ranges, and a defense that did not tire or fall apart under pressure. The engineering gap was plain: miniaturized electronics inside artillery shells, reliable long-range radar on small ships, and the industrial capacity to field all of it across a fleet. The human ledger ran both ways. On the Japanese side, young pilots trained for a single strike now faced long, grinding approaches under accurate fire, their aircraft bleeding speed and control before they could ever see a transport. On the American side, destroyer crews lived with the knowledge that they were the lightning rods, forward, exposed, and expected to hold. Their survival depended on comm drills, split-second decisions, and technology they trusted with their lives. When the system worked, their sacrifice saved dozens of ships and thousands of sailors farther back. When the numbers grew too large, even the best coordination could be overwhelmed, but every minute bought by the pickets was a minute for the main fleet to prepare, maneuver, and survive. By the time the battle for Okinawa ground on into late spring, the pattern was unmistakable. Picket destroyers and their fighter screens had turned kamikaze raids from sudden hammer blows into protracted engagements that favored defenders. Proximity fuses multiplied the lethality of every 5-inch round. Radar tracking and fighter direction drained the attacker's organization and fuel before they reached the final dive. And layered guns denied them a clean, straight path even when they broke through. The cost was terrible, but the defense achieved its purpose, protecting the invasion force long enough to finish the job ashore. In the end, the radar picket line was more than a tactical tweak. It was a demonstration of how electronics, precision munitions, and coordination could reshape a battlefield. It showed that industrial capacity and scientific engineering, shrunk into a small black box inside a shell, spun on a mast in the wind, or whispered over a headset, could outweigh courage alone. The men on both sides felt that truth in the most immediate way possible. For the kamikaze pilot who spotted a lone destroyer and believed the path was clear, the new reality was brutally simple.